Have you ever walked away from someone who made you question your worth, your sanity, your very identity? Imagine the silence that follows. Not empty, but electric, shaking the world of the person who thought they controlled you. That moment, that choice, is more powerful than any argument, any apology, manipulation they ever used. Tonight, I'm going to reveal the 7 terrifying truths narcissists only realize after you go no contact. Truths that will make them confront what they lost and make you see just how unstoppable your freedom really is. Stay with me, this is your awakening. No contact is often misunderstood as a moment of disappearance, but in truth, it is the first breath of self-respect a person has taken in a very long time. It is the moment when someone who has been living in emotional turbulence finally chooses the quiet strength of peace over the exhausting noise of pain. When you stop responding, stop explaining, stop defending, you are not shutting someone out. You are letting yourself in. You are allowing your tired heart the space to remember what it feels like to be treated with dignity, to be spoken to with kindness, to be valued not for what you can endure, but for who you truly are. For so long, you may have felt the need to justify your boundaries, your emotions, your worth. But the first keynote reminds us that no contact is not about punishing the other person. It is about unlearning the belief that you must shrink yourself to keep the peace. It is the moment you reclaim your right to rest, your right to clarity, your right to exist without being emotionally drained or manipulated. In that quiet distance, something powerful happens. The fog begins to lift. You start seeing the truth of what you survived and the strength it took to survive it. This choice is not born from coldness. It is born from courage, because choosing yourself, especially after being taught to abandon yourself, is one of the bravest things a human being can do. When you pull back from chaos, you create a space where your soul can finally breathe again, where your inner voice becomes louder than the one that once controlled you. And that breath, your first real breath, is the beginning of everything. But what happens when that silence starts to echo back to the one who caused the pain? And what truth do they face in the void you leave behind? Narcissists build their world on the assumption that you will never leave. They believe their cycles of charm, chaos, and control have shaped you into someone who will always return, no matter how much you're hurt or how deeply they push your limits. For them, your endurance becomes proof of their power. They take your forgiveness as permission, your patience as weakness, and your compassion as certainty that you'll stay forever. But then one day, without a dramatic scene or a final plea, you simply stop coming back. That moment, quiet, steady, absolute, shatters their illusion of invincibility. What they never expected was your strength. They never imagined the resilience that was quietly building inside you during every argument, every silent treatment, every moment of emotional exhaustion. They never saw how surviving their chaos was teaching you how to live without it. When you finally walk away, they face a truth they are emotionally unequipped to process. The person they believed they controlled had a breaking point, and the courage to act on it. For the first time, they are forced to confront the reality that their confidence in your loyalty was nothing more than entitlement. They never believed you would choose peace over them, sanity over confusion, self-love over their version of love. And that realization terrifies them because it exposes the flaw in their entire identity. If you can leave, then they were never as powerful as they thought. Your absence becomes the evidence of their miscalculation. Your silence becomes the answer they can't manipulate. And as they watch you walk away, they are left to face the most unsettling truth of all. You were never trapped. You were just gathering the strength to leave. But what happens when they finally realize the door you closed will never open again? And how do they react when they understand you're not coming back this time? To a narcissist, you were more than a partner, a friend, or a companion. You were their emotional fuel. You were the steady source of affirmation that soothed their insecurities, fed their ego, and made them feel significant in a world they secretly believed was indifferent to them. Every compliment you offered, every reassurance you gave, every moment you tried to understand their pain became the lifeline they depended on far more than they would ever admit. They relied on your empathy to stabilize their emptiness, your validation to mask their self-doubt, and your attention to distract them from the hollowness they constantly try to outrun. When you go no contact, that supply ends abruptly. There is no warning, no slow fade, just silence. And in that silence, the narcissist is forced to face an emotional landscape they have spent their entire life avoiding. Without you to reflect back an inflated version of themselves, they feel a sudden collapse inside, a void they cannot fill with logic, pride, or bravado. Their world becomes unfamiliar and unnervingly quiet. They look around and realize that the people who remain in their life don't admire them the way you did. They don't care to understand their wounds or tolerate their moods. They don't offer the patience you gave so freely. And in this stark contrast, the narcissist finally recognizes how rare your presence truly was. You were genuine. You were steady. You were the person who held the emotional weight they were incapable of carrying on their own. Now, with that support gone, they feel the cracks in their identity widening. Their reflection grows dimmer. Their world grows colder. And your absence becomes the uncomfortable truth they cannot escape. But what happens when they realize they can't replicate what they lost with anyone else? And what do they do when the emptiness you once filled begins to swallow them whole? Narcissists don't relate to people as they truly are. They relate to the version they construct in their minds, a version shaped by their needs, fears, and desire for control. They build a fantasy version of you, a character who exists to validate them, agree with them, admire them, and bend to their emotional demands. This imagined version of you is predictable, compliant, and easily instructed. But it is not you. It never was. You were always far more complex, far more human, and far more powerful than the role they assigned you. When you go no contact, that illusion collapses. Suddenly, the fantasy they relied on can no longer hold up against the reality of your decision. For the first time, they are forced to confront the truth that you were not someone they could mold. You had your own thoughts, your own boundaries, your own identity that did not revolve around their expectations. The moment you walked away, the script they wrote for you disintegrated, and all that's left is the unsettling realization that they never truly knew you at all. This is terrifying for them because it exposes something they desperately avoid. Other people have autonomy. Other people have power. Other people can choose to walk away. The narcissist realizes that while they were busy trying to shape you into their ideal, you were quietly becoming someone they couldn't control, someone who outgrew the narrative they tried to trap you in. The loss isn't just about losing you, it's about losing the fantasy that kept them feeling superior. And in that loss, they face a truth they have no defense against. The real you was always stronger than the version they created. But what happens when they finally see the real you standing outside their illusion? And how do they cope when they realize they can't rewrite your truth anymore? To a narcissist, you were far more essential than they ever allowed themselves to admit. You were the emotional anchor in a storm they continually created but never knew how to calm. You were the steady voice that brought reason to their chaos, the patience that softened their anger, and the compassion that made their world feel less threatening. Even if they dismissed your feelings, minimized your needs, or pretended they didn't care, deep inside they relied on the stability you brought. You were the emotional home they could return to, messy, wounded, demanding, but always the door to remain open. When you go no contact, that home disappears. And only then do they realize what you truly meant to them. Not because they suddenly develop empathy, but because they suddenly feel the coldness of a world without your warmth. For the first time, they sense the absence of the comfort they once took for granted. They notice that the support they demanded is no longer available. They realize that the person who absorbed their frustrations, soothed their insecurities, and made them feel valued despite their behavior is no longer within reach. This recognition hits them like a truth they tried to outrun. You mattered far more than their ego wanted to acknowledge. You weren't just another person in their life. You were the bridge between their instability and the illusion of normalcy they tried to maintain. Without you, the cracks in their emotional foundation grow wider, more visible, and impossible to ignore. It's only after you leave that they understand you were not optional, you were foundational, and they let that foundation crumble. But what happens when they finally realize that no one else will ever care the way you did? And how do they respond when they understand that losing you was their greatest self-inflicted wound? A narcissist's entire playbook is built on access to your emotions, your reactions, your empathy, and your willingness to explain yourself. Every tactic they use, from guilt tripping to love bombing to twisted logic, relies on one thing: the ability to reach you. As long as they can provoke you, confuse you, or lure you back with promises and apologies, they feel in control. It's not the words they use that matter, it's the predictable outcome they expect from you. They count on your heart being open, your boundaries being flexible, and your desire for peace outweighing your need for self-respect. But when you go no contact, that entire strategy collapses. Suddenly, every move they've mastered, every manipulation they've repeated for years, falls flat. There is no reaction to feed on, no vulnerability to exploit, no emotional access to walk through. Their tactics become powerless, not because they've changed, but because you have. Your silence becomes the one boundary they cannot bypass, the one line they cannot cross, the one situation they cannot twist to their advantage. This is deeply unsettling for them, because it forces a realization they've avoided their entire life. Their control was never as strong as they believed. It depended entirely on your participation. And now, with the door closed, their influence evaporates. They try everything: provocation, pity, charm, threats, but nothing works. You've stepped out of the cycle, and without you, the cycle dies. In the end, they face the truth that terrifies them most. Their power was an illusion, sustained only by your willingness to engage. And now that you've reclaimed your voice through silence, they have nowhere left to go. But what happens when they realize they've lost the one person who made their tactics effective? And what will they do when the only power they ever had disappears in the space your absence leaves behind? When a narcissist watches you go no contact, they expect to see you fall apart. They imagine you struggling without them, missing them, doubting yourself, and eventually crawling back. In their mind, your dependence is a given. But what they never anticipate is what actually happens: you grow. The distance that was meant to isolate you becomes the very space where your strength begins to rise. With every day of silence, you shed another layer of confusion, self-doubt, and emotional exhaustion. You begin to breathe easier, think clearer, and see yourself without their distorted lens. Slowly, you rediscover parts of yourself that were buried under their criticism, their moods, their demands. You start to rebuild, not because you want to prove anything, but because healing feels like coming home. As you regain your confidence and clarity, something shifts inside you. You stop questioning your worth. You stop trying to earn love that was never freely given. You stop begging for understanding from someone who never wanted to understand you in the first place, and without realizing it, you become stronger than the version of you they once controlled. You begin pursuing goals again, reconnecting with yourself, reclaiming your energy, your joy, your voice. Your spirit becomes brighter, steadier, more grounded. From afar, the narcissist sees this transformation, whether directly or through silence that speaks louder than words. And what terrifies them is not just your strength, but the proof it carries. They were never the source of your power. You were. Your healing becomes undeniable evidence that their influence wasn't as deep or permanent as they believed. It shows them that their absence doesn't destroy you. In fact, it frees you. But what happens when your growth exposes just how small their world really is? And how will they handle watching the one they tried to break rise higher than ever before? Narcissists underestimate boundaries because they underestimate you. They believe that as long as they can talk you in circles, guilt you, or charm you into surrender, your limits will bend to accommodate their needs. To them, boundaries are not expressions of self-respect. They are obstacles to control. But when you finally go no contact, your silence becomes the ultimate boundary, one they cannot negotiate with, argue against, or manipulate into disappearing. It is the first time your no is not a conversation, but a conclusion. And without your words to twist or emotions to exploit, your boundary becomes louder than any argument you could ever have had with them. What they never expected was that your absence would teach them more than your presence ever did. While you were with them, your boundaries were often dismissed, minimized, or punished. But the moment you step away, those boundaries become undeniable. They can no longer pretend. You'll always return, always forgive, always absorb the impact of their behavior. Your silence becomes a mirror reflecting the consequences they never believed they'd face. And that mirror is sharp, honest, and impossible for them to distort. In that space, they begin to understand, though they'll never admit it, that your boundaries were never meant to hurt them. They were meant to protect you. They were meant to define what you can and cannot accept, what you will and will not tolerate. When you left, you were not withdrawing love. You were reclaiming dignity. You were drawing a line that said, this is who I am, and this is how I deserve to be treated. Your silence becomes your strength. Your distance becomes your declaration, and your boundary becomes the truth they can no longer escape. But what happens when they realize that no, manipulation can break the wall you finally built? And how do they cope when they see your boundary standing stronger than their ego? Consequences are something narcissists spend their lives avoiding. They slip around accountability with excuses, charm, denial, or blame shifting. They rewrite stories, distort reality, and twist emotions to ensure they never have to face the impact of their actions. But when you go no contact, something extraordinary happens for the very first time. They are forced to confront the outcome of their own behavior. Your disappearance is not a reaction they can talk their way out of. It's not a phase, not a silent treatment, not a tactic. It is the direct result of everything they did and everything they refused to change. In that sudden void, the narcissist meets a truth they never believed applied to them. Actions have consequences. The person they pushed away, ignored, devalued, and took for granted is gone, not because they wanted to hurt the narcissist, but because they had to save themselves. Your departure becomes the first and only form of accountability they cannot dodge. They try to rationalize it, rewrite it, or paint themselves as the victim, but the reality keeps echoing back. You left because of them. What terrifies them most is the permanence of it. They always assumed you would stay, that the cycle would continue, that their charm or anger or manipulation would pull you back in. When none of it works, they are faced with a truth they cannot spin. Their behavior cost them someone they thought they owned emotionally, and in that loss, they experience something profoundly uncomfortable: responsibility. They may never admit it out loud, but deep inside, they know the truth they tried to hide from created the ending. And once that consequence arrives, it becomes the one truth they can neither control nor escape. But what happens when they realize there's no one left to blame but themselves? And what will they do when the silence forces them to confront what they destroyed? Freedom is a concept narcissists can never fully understand because it exists outside their control. To them, people are possessions, emotions are tools, and independence is a threat. They build relationships like cages, carefully constructed to ensure that those around them cannot move freely, cannot breathe without their approval, cannot define their own worth apart from the narcissist's judgment. But when you go no contact, you break free from that cage. Every message unanswered, every door closed, every silent day becomes a brick removed from the prison they built around you. And in that freedom, you discover a truth they can never steal. Your life belongs to you alone. Your absence is a mirror reflecting their inability to contain or manipulate you. They realize that the love, attention, and energy they once assumed were theirs to command have become yours to give or withhold. Your choices, your boundaries, and your reclaimed time reveal a terrifying fact: they no longer hold power over the course of your life. And that realization terrifies them more than anger, sadness, or confrontation ever could. They see that the person they tried to shape, control, and diminish is now unrecognizable to them. Not because you've changed for them, but because you've returned to yourself. This freedom is not just the absence of their influence, it is the presence of your authenticity, your joy, your confidence, and your inner strength. It is the life you were meant to live, unshadowed by manipulation, unchained from guilt, and unburdened by their expectations. And in that liberated existence, you become a force that cannot be intimidated, silenced, or replaced. But what happens when they finally see that your life is no longer their story to edit? And how will they cope when they realize that the freedom you found is something they can never take away? Remember this: walking away is not weakness. It is the ultimate act of courage. No contact is not punishment for them. It is liberation for you. Every step you take toward peace, every boundary you hold, every moment you choose yourself is a victory they cannot erase. Your absence teaches lessons louder than any words, and your freedom becomes the truth they fear the most. So hold your silence, embrace your strength, and let your life speak in ways they never imagined. The power is yours, and your rebirth is unstoppable. Watch closely. They will realize it too.